it is no surprise to anyone that this is an incredibly partisan period in this nation's history, and particularly in this building over my shoulder. It's interesting when you find something that is not particularly partisan. And this issue of support for the parks is one of the few that we've ever polled that has virtually no differences by partisan ideology in its fundamental support for the parks. For almost all Americans, the national parks are an American icon, a majestic evidence of some of the best that we have in this country, an awe-inspiring sense of what it means to be the best of America, truly America the Beautiful. Support for the parks is not a partisan issue either. Virtually all Americans, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, believe that having the federal government play a prominent role in supporting and protecting and defending the parks is an appropriate role for the federal government. Nor is funding a particularly partisan issue either. I mean, single digits of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats believe we spend too much on the parks. And even when you tell them we spend $3 billion on the parks, 88% of Republicans think you ought to maintain it or increase it. So support for the parks is simply not a partisan issue at all. And vocal support for the parks is something that can give political leaders on both sides a less partisan edge. It looks like you are being more of an American than a partisan when you talk about supporting, protecting, and defending the parks. So with that as an introduction, let me turn over to Dan and talk a little bit more about some of the specifics that we believe could be helpful, particularly for Republican politicians.
Great, thanks everybody for having us here. As Whit said, we're Republican environmentalists, and we work with a lot of different environmental groups. We've gone and spoken to various groups, and I will say that, you know, having climbed a almost 19,000-foot peak, that was less uncomfortable sometimes than being a Republican, trying to navigate those shoals in this town. But you know, we try to help where we can, particularly our own party, where some of our candidates, frankly, are a little tone deaf on these issues. But you know, Whit was talking about just the broad partisan appeal of the parks, and they're really not political. And so, you know, we came up with just some messaging things, just not only that people can use when talking to Republicans or the Republican candidates can use, but really that are really likely to be effective among a wide swath of the electorate and elected officials. First of all, if voters look at a candidate and say that candidate cares about the national parks, they're also likely to think that candidate represents a lot of other very positive qualities. This isn't always true of, you know, everything you could say about a candidate. For example, they're likely to say that that candidate cares about the environment and is a good steward of our nation's resources, but also will protect our American heritage, understands what makes America a special country, is patriotic, and is a forward-looking candidate who thinks about the future. So it's an issue that voters associate with a lot of other positive things. Secondly, the lure of parks as a destination, not just for national tourism, but for international tourism, can really be used as a powerful economic argument. That it's effective among all three party groups, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, but it's most effective among Republicans. Park visitors spend over $1 billion a year in the parks alone. That doesn't count the tens of billions of dollars that they spend, you know, and y'all probably know these facts and figures better than I do, but you know, in the surrounding communities and the towns and these gateways to the big parks. Really kind of promoting the parks in an effort to increase tourism as an economic message is something that's likely to be very effective to talking to Republican office holders, but also for Republican candidates looking for positive messages when they're out on the campaign trail. Thirdly, contact with the parks greatly increases people's desire to protect them. So in other words, the more likely somebody is to have visited a park, the more interested, and I mean significantly more interested they are in protecting and preserving them. And when you think about it, that makes sense. I mean, if somebody has been, for example, to the Grand Canyon, or even, at the local level, like to say Great Falls, they understand the value of these places. And so if they visited a park, they're much more likely to support, more resources for the parks, more money, more staffing, things of that nature. Over 80% of American voters have visited a national park at some point in their life, which is really, really a stunning figure when you think about it. Next, supporting parks is a family-friendly message. A candidate who pushes, visiting national parks is a very kind of family-friendly, values-oriented thing. It resonates particularly with Hispanic voters. If y'all have watched the election returns or have watched the news or anything, you might have heard that Republicans have a little problem attracting Hispanic voters right now. And we as Republicans, view this as an issue that is something that can resonate in the Hispanic community. It's, again, not just a Republican issue. It resonates on a larger scale. But as we as Republicans try to find our way out of this gigantic hole that we've dug ourselves, national parks can be another rung kind of in that ladder. To help us there. Finally, as everybody knows, the centennial of the park system is coming up in 2016, and it really offers an opportunity for all political candidates to really put this issue more front and center than it has been, but particularly for Republicans. Teddy Roosevelt is an icon in American history, and particularly within the Republican Party. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt is totally cool. He was a badass. I mean, he was just like a seriously awesome guy. And there aren't a lot of cool and definitely not badass Republicans in Washington right now. And I think we feel like this is an opportunity for Republicans to sort of re-embrace that legacy, something that frankly they've kind of drifted away from in more recent years. And so we see this as an opportunity for Republicans. Again, the centennial offers an opportunity for politicians and policymakers of all stripes to really take advantage of and drive this issue. But for Republicans to sort of re-embrace that legacy of Teddy Roosevelt, we think is something that could really be a powerful thing.